Okay, I will try again. Okay, now it's recording. Okay, so just quick summary. So with RESTful APIs, you can use multiple HTTP methods, right? Get to get data, post to add new objects, put to edit existing objects, and delete to delete some objects that are stored. For example, customers, right? Get customers can give us all customers. Get customers with specific ID can give us one of them. Now we are talking about the queries. So you can get customers that are newer than, let's say, 30 days and older than, let's say, 15 days, right? We can decide what those parameters mean for us. And you can post, and with post you should be adding, you can add a body to the request, which can be, for example, a JSON object. So let's say my email, and let's say name, my name or something, right? So we can add the body to the post request. We can do the same for the put request when we want to edit some customer. Let's say we want to set his email, the customer change his email to something different. So I can do the put request and then handle that, right, with some new data.
And when we want to edit that data, we use the query parameter again for the changing data.
You ask if we can use the query parameter here? We can. We usually can. I mean, it also depends on what we are building, right? It's not like it's not possible to use them, right? If that makes sense to use them for like some reason, right? If we are changing the email address, kind of a convention of the REST API is that we pass the data we change in the body, right? But if there is some very specific case, then we could also add something here, like some query parameter equals something, and that could also be used. But usually the convention and the way that it's standard by most developers is to do that in the body of the request. Okay, so let's try it out. How do we actually, right? We have those special parameters, right? The path params. We have the query parameters here. But how do we actually get them in code, right? They're not working magically. It's not like we just passed some number and it will magically get the ID. We need to write the code that will handle that. Also, there's no built-in functionality that will be newer than. We have to handle that ourselves in code. So how do we handle that? Let's say we have app get users, right? We can have another endpoint now. Let's call it users, and then by slash. There's a way to define the path param here. You do that with the colon, and then you give the name for the param, let's say ID. That would mean that there's slash user slash and something that is an ID in the path. And how do we get that value? It comes to us in the request dot params, and then .id, right? So this object .params will contain all of the path parameters. If you have more of them, let's say, right, then it will be the other one will be something. That's why we give them a names. We can have multiple of them. For example, we could have something like user ID, and then we could, for this specific user, we would want to get his orders, and then on one specific order for that specific user. That's how we can build them longer. So get me from users with this user ID, his orders, and order with his specific ID. And that also kind of fills into the folder way of applying, right? We would have a folder users with now this would be a folder with this specific user ID when our data related to that user. And in that folder we would have subfolder orders of that user and specific order. It can get even more complicated, but we don't need to go there yet. So we will go with getting the user's ID. So let's actually and res dot shall I call it? Okay, and actually I want to make a breakpoint here. Don't even configure to debug that. Okay, let's do it differently. Let's do I will just do console.log of the params just to see, right, what comes inside the object.params, and then actually I'm accessing params.userid because it's this field will be replaced by what we pass in, and I will send this as the response. Let's try this out. Starting the server. So those are the endpoints I have. So let me just do one thing. So those are the endpoints I have in here. So now I will call get users, and with the get and without any body. What will be the response I will get when I call this endpoint here based on the code I have here? If I have endpoints like that, one is get users and another is get with the params here, and I have another post users, and that's it. So I have three endpoints defined. What response will I get if I do get localhost blah 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 / users? Test OK. Yeah, because it detected that this is the path without any additional params that I'm calling, so I get this test here. So if we
post/user, when does that one work?
If we make a request with the HTTP method post, if you don't know or didn't hear about HTTP methods, that's something to research. There are different kind of, it's called HTTP methods. It's kind of a way of calling API. It can be get request, post request, put request, path, and all other different that are not really widely used. And in the browser, it's by default always, if you open a website in the browser, it's by default always the get request here. That's why we use Postman, because we can make other than get requests, we can make post requests very easily. And if you make an application, right, if you make a front-end application, the JavaScript that you write on the front end, you can decide if you want to make a get, post, put, patch, whatever. It's very easy. So that's like another kind of information that we send. So if we do post users, we will get post OK, right? We needed to select the method post to do that. Okay, let's go back to get. This way we get test OK. What will happen if I pass something here? Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. What output will I get?
User ID.
Yeah, exactly. User ID 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's what I get. So you see, I'm not hard-coded that in the code. If I add something more here, I can write whatever here. Right? Whatever I write, we get it here. And also in the console.log, right? I'm doing console.log reg.params, and you can see that it's an object that will contain all of these params that we define in the path here. So since we have only one user ID, if we do that, we get the object with user ID something. If you would do something more, let's say orders and then order ID, and let me just quickly restart it. Users, let's say user ID 1, 2, 3, 4. Orders, let's say order ID ABC. Cannot get. I think I haven't saved the file. I changed the code, but I haven't saved it. Yeah, and in the console.log, we've seen that we have the object with more of those. So, right, I defined. Let me.
If we add the less parameters, it's not showing again. If we send the users 1 to 3 and not other part, what's happened then? It's not going to this method.
No, you need to go.
Yeah, let's see. Good question. Let's see. So what if I remove that? Even though I have defined endpoint with both of them, if I don't do that, don't pass it in.
It's gonna take only the first.
Not found, right? We didn't specify an endpoint that would accept only the ID now. We need both of them. So if something is not fitting any of the endpoints, it will just return an error. Okay, so time for some exercise. So basically, you are doing the app for. Oh, let's start. Yeah, let's start with the new one. Let me see. With the exercise one, right? So we can start with doing that. That we will make a new. Let's make new Express app. Right, let's write few endpoints. Let's make a contact, educations, and skills, or maybe just 2 of them. Just make some endpoints that will be for now just get endpoints, and we will start with practicing on the parameters up here. Okay, I will just tell about the last one maybe before the query parameter. How do we handle? How do we get this type of parameters? The one with the question mark. So they're as easy as it is with the path parameters. So whenever, let's say here, we have this endpoint get users, right? And there's another object. For the path parameters, it's rig.params. And for query parameters, let me do console.log. rig.query, and it's basically working the same way. And I will just do get users, so the first endpoint here, and I will do console.log query and see what's inside. If I call it like that, it's empty object. There's no query parameters defined, but I can start defining my query parameters. I can start, let's say, users older than 30, and I get them in the rig.query object. I start getting them here, so I can access them. I can do test OK, and then do older than equal I can start displaying them here. You see? Right, and I can make all of them here. You don't need. There's a difference between the path params and the query params. Here, you need to define each of them that are accepted, and you cannot like pass in more. But here, if you start passing more, they will be just ignored. If something is not, for example, in the code, I only kind of access the older than. If I pass newer than or anything else, it will be just ignored. I will get them in the object, so I can use them, but I don't get an error that this path doesn't exist, right? So that's kind of a difference. Okay, so time for some exercise. I think we can do that before the break. The exercise is to just start a new app from scratch, right? So we do the npm init and all the stuff that we need to get Express installed and running, and add 3 endpoints that will be, for now, just get. Let's forget about post yet, but let's use one with just get, for example, users or something without any path or query params, and one that will use the path params, and one that will use the query params, and just just return them in the response, just like I did. So user ID is something or something okay, this equal that, right? Just to get started with that. I will make the code a little bit smaller, but so everything can fit. Maybe I will do like that as well. Okay, so I just split it so it's visible. Yeah. So the first step, just create a new folder, and from the scratch try to start a new npm project. Try to install the Express, and then just write your index.js and start writing the code, right? So get Express inside the project by using require, and add some endpoint. Just call the Express, get the app, and start writing endpoints with app.get.
Do you need
Yeah, I'm looking for the cord.
yeah, there's
Oh yeah, maybe I can reach there. I think I have one cable.
just good.
Right. It helps. That's a mess with the cables. I think I can go even a little bit back. Okay, but yeah, it works. Thanks. Okay, so did everybody manage to start a new project and install Express? Okay. Yeah, for now I think we can just make like anything such as just yeah, just practice the query parameters. The breakdown exactly the database stuff. So we will probably go in that direction to make your database. You can try again.
And it's not only safe because it's saying that there are differences with
Usually like the most popular like 3,000, 5,000, 8,000, 80 or something like that. So I think any number like above like 2,000 plus should be okay. Yes. Like there's no, you should passing as tricky. So without the code, so you're passing in undefined variable context. So you're defining.
Okay, so let's function we add the HTML tag and then send
We can actually, it's not usually like very often happening to like real life applications, because usually you are sending the JSON and the front end application like React or something is reading the JSON and then displaying the HTML. But just for the exercise, yeah, you can just start writing instead of this empty string. You can write some HTML here, for example, if you want to make something and then see how it looks like. I think the ultimately it should actually show you as a nice little HTML, so you can try it out. Close. I think it's maybe the ultimate maybe you have normal. Or maybe you need to restart the server. Yeah. Yeah. So you can send it.
So this is the end of that was like the first info. This is not,
It's like a rare, like the title is there. The reg for request and reg for response.
yeah, but
I hate like especially in JavaScript. Try NP,
in this response, what
try NPX. There is this kind of command for Okay, it's a common. I don't know why. Sometimes, for me, sometimes for some reason, but with npx is for executing the commands to make sure to get them from the node modules and actually like so they are actually able to execute.
So now if I like remove this or
Yeah, I think it should work. The in capital, the casing, so uppercase and lowercase.
It's also you can do console but
Now you have to write node space dot. Yeah.
in the console block. Here we have the this Node.js, right? This is fire.
yeah.
And then
I'm gonna try this.
Just have to focus on the first folder.
I think there might be some typo somewhere in the
And
scene
save.
because clearly let's cover it again.
So I create some framework here. Is it
Yes, typo. The mark, like the letters. This one has like I give it
because I make fast, like
Yeah,
my brain reads faster than I need to practice to write.
then you will probably kind of like TypeScript you can learn because it's. Do you know TypeScript?
No, I can't do it.
It's kind of like an extension for JavaScript, like adding a lot of like kind of checks.
This one?
Yes, exactly. It's kind of like a JavaScript on steroids. We have a lot of types, and it makes sure that you, for example, don't use a variable that you never
So I should download it? Or?
But it's kind of difficult to set up, so maybe like your free time.
Yeah, it's not now, but I mean, this
Yeah,
is gonna apply and
you can just npm install TypeScript, and that is, but it has to be compiled from TypeScript to JavaScript, right? So there's when you install that, you have the command line CSC that if you pass the TypeScript file, it will give you a JavaScript file, but you write in TypeScript. So
maybe at the lunch break.
yeah, then we can talk about
I will
that.
install it now and then
Yes, and we can have a talk.
thank you so much.
No problem.
Did it help?
First error.
Let's go back to the index.js. So if you go in the normal environment, yeah, and your index is here, but it's created in Node modules. Yeah, so you can copy, paste it out from there, right? You can go. Yes, exactly. I think it's in the when you go there, when you open your script, you see that B, open the B. Yeah, yes. You can maybe right click on that, and you can open anyway, review and explorer. You can open that, yeah. And so you can take it away, yeah, just move it away from here. Or you can right click and cut and then paste. No.
I just looked at it.
We can, after the paste, we can delete it from and just, yeah, exactly. Just in the folder, right? And delete it from those and try to run it from here. I think it should work.
I'll do that. So, okay.
Sorry, so something is so the question mark come for the first one, but then after each name, you use the and you use
Okay, oh, and.
Yes, so the first one is question mark, something equals something, and then everything.
So, I guess, no.
After, let's say, 2010 or something like that, just more example how we design the API and what you actually want to return. If you want to have just potential, or you can make the query parameters, right? If you want to just like or like that,
I don't have to write
your
sometimes.
right? Then you will pass your API. Try to get the outcome that you right? Because that's what the API is. So you can try to do that. If you want to make what you can, just say an array checker, right? Just put it back on create like an object inside, like property inside. One would be the name. I just write a name, for example, the beginning.
No, what was the
The string called and another parameter,
Not the post.
like graduation year.
I'm confused in this one, like the user ID and user.
So users will just give you a username.
What is parents?
And what you can do, for example,
Parents? Was it the parameters? No?
but you do the query, for example,
Which one request? So we requested username.
you have to create a sketch and then you query and graduated after and then you pass it, for example, and try to then push the relationship. That's like how you make like real life application. So you can try. That would be the query parameter. So the one that
Yes, yes.
yeah, and then you can try to use that.
I get an error again from
Yeah.
It's not necessary.
So not like the syntax error?
So then we
So that's one.
right.
Let's see. Let's go next line of let's try now. Let's still look yeah, I should be able to square.
So the only get the simplest one is so far. When I write these one, parents.
I see like typo like that. User's ID and his what is the user ID. And also the big letters and small letters they matter, so you have to be identical. And here also like the users. Yeah, and that's your and also like you're using here, right? It's just important to
And these parents are used to like when we have to load the URL. So we have to use the parent. Like when we have to access commands from a different portion of the URL. So we use the parent.
I mean, the params is like you can use params or you can use the query parameters. They are kind of they work very similarly. So it's not like you can do stuff only with one and you cannot do with the other. It's more about if you want to learn the REST API way, right? Then you should use params for just usually for getting like some IDs and stuff like that, and query params for more like asking more like a question about the data, something like this. I want data older than something. If you want to identify specific objects, you would use param with the ID. But if you want some older than this or newer than this or something else, then you do it like with the question. Everything we have to write ourselves. So the only thing that if you write older than, you can get it reg.query, and you can get that value. Let's say I pass older than 30, so you get number 30, and now it's your job as the developer to know what data you have, and you now to do, for example, you have array, right? You can do your array.filter, where let's say data is like older than something, or so it's your job. There's no really built-in stuff.
Both of them should be. No, it didn't work.
What exactly? All of
I know, I tried this before. I can see this something. Like this example, I can do in one, but when should I do this? I don't understand the code.
Okay, I guess we are thinking.
I need to fix both of them. So I'm trying to say like user is user. ID is ID. So I try to do it that way, and that's what I do.
I think the res.send, it's not like console.log, so you cannot just put it. You need to make build one string. You cannot pass like an int for parameters. So I think you need to, you know, the string literal and syntax to make it like, for example, you know this syntax, you know, let's say something with those with those packets here.
Yeah, I do it also. For instance,
Already defined.
Now it's working. How about I need to switch for
But
the
I
ID.
don't know.
I need to
Yeah, but it's not the user.
I can do copy paste for this and then change.
Yeah. No, I think the rest sent can be only one line.
This is the one.
But you can make user is user comma, ID is ID.
So I can put comma.
In the string. It has to be one, yeah, it has to, because you return one string. You cannot have it
ID
two. And then,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that should work. You have to, because you're returning a string back, you cannot just cut it with parts or return two strings. Okay, I think it's two, so we can make the lunch break, and I can just.
Because it can collapse. Because
Education, and then you have this one, and then you have this one. So, let's see, the code is. It's like it should work. Yeah, exactly. You have two requests per send. So you need to return a one string only, right? You cannot just return two. We know the package. Yeah. Okay. Just the same problem. Okay, guys. So it's the lunchtime, right? It's already 2:04. So. Don't.
Just a small one.
Yeah, sure. Don't need to. I mean, I say like you don't have to say it's not like a castle.
This car, so let's see.
Okay.
we just saw the code. There's no problem.
It's gonna be fine.
But it is difficult to start the server.
Right. So what's the problem?
So just put
There is no problem, it doesn't start.
Ah, okay.
You cannot see any syntax error for some.
Can I have a look?
Do you want to change the
No, I think it's fine.
Can she change to users
I think it was not stopped, and it was like server starting, and you could like kind of type in the same console, but it wasn't executing this,
So it's not
comments.
necessary to start every time.
Yeah, what I did Control C to stop the server.
Okay.
So now I see, the username stuff, and then I can execute next command. Because if you start Node to start, you can type stuff, but it doesn't do anything, right? It just like it's being discarded. Yeah, so you need to stop Control C and then start again.
because we cannot have
That's I have to remember that as well. It's quite strong.
Just do you remember how to stop like with the Control and C?
But it says every time, like if you want to stop, it says
Press Control. Yeah, exactly. So,
do we want to get some It's just the lunchtime.
so basically whatever you do, it takes me 2 weeks. Thank you. Very much. Should I do it for you, Fatima? No.
No, I doesn't work on mine. I have to install again.
I between buttons now.
Yes.
And G, upgrade or G, upgrade, someone doesn't know about this shit. Just to restart, it should work.
Yes, here. No, it's off because it's kind of like a string. I need something. No, this is a string right now. I don't know why.
It's cool,
Yes, but I cannot find the. Comment on we need to write that here.
no already changes. I wanted to restart do you have 5 minutes? Yeah. For me before we go and eat? Because now there is a queue. If you wait here or wait up, it will be the same.
It's okay. Yeah.
I have like from. I have problem like in my brain is like reading faster than my code. So basically, for instance, name I put like always NMAE instead M. So he told me that I should use this TypeScript.
Yes.
Do you know how to use it, or should I ask him?
So TypeScript is
He says
it's another language
okay.
than JavaScript.
Okay.
So right now what we're using is JavaScript.
Yeah.
You could also do it in TypeScript, but it's very similar to JavaScript.
Yeah.
It has like it's a little bit different with the syntax.
Okay.
But it's the same. But why people are using TypeScript is because it's more strict.
Okay.
So if you're making a file or making a title or something,
Yeah.
it will show you.
Yeah. So maybe you meant something else I misunderstand.
But still, you can use Node.js with TypeScript.
Yeah.
It's just another syntax.
Yeah. Okay. Where do you work?
I'm student.
Where?
Student.
Where do you start work?
High school.
Where?
High school.
Yeah, sure. Did you try with the usually maybe not with the G.
Right, because I was not using no.
I think the G is installed globally in the I think you can do without G, just install that. And I don't know why they always combine that. It's globally, it's better to install specific projects. kind of intro.
How do you do these things?
That's right. For example, with the TX materials, and then you can use types basically, you can have, for example, say, test code, and then, for example, you have like a lot of like the support, right? So closing string. You cannot reassign it with something with the number. It will say that okay, it's constant, right? Even if you make right, it's kind of saying well, one is not assignable to text, so you have the type string, right? So that's one thing. Another thing that if you make a close function, let's say fine, just maybe. So you cannot use an argument to say there's message function, right? For example, so you will get a lot of like kind of support. You cannot find it. This is not a specific type. Yeah, it is valid. Yes. So it's a superset of JavaScript. So it's JavaScript plus.
From now on, like instead of doing the assignment.js, I can do .ts.
Yeah, but you would need to run later the compiler to compile it back to JavaScript to run it, or set up a Node. Node is supporting on JavaScript, but there are packages that allow that. There's quite a lot of stuff. Yeah, but it's good to read about it and read some tutorials. I really recommend because it's really cool thing that allow you to reduce a lot of typos and errors and stuff like that. So it's worth looking into that.
Also, can you repeat the query for us because it's the problem.
What? So so the query, right?
Yeah.
How to? Okay, sure. So queries, right? So they come. Okay, maybe what's the? I will go work on like your code. I can help.
But I have problem too. Maybe you can give us a better example.
Okay. Then I'll globally like start again of the queries. Try to explain them. I think I didn't went that well. So let's have a look in the kind of what internet has to say about queries.
It's pt.2 2011.
I just use my hotspot. Just have a lot of data, so. Okay. So HTTP query parameters. Right, so even on Wikipedia or whatever, you have the kind of data. So they have specific formats. Like this is a good example. You have the question mark after this is kind of the normal path that we had so far. And query basically adds at the end of the path, you can add like additional key value pairs. For example, name is a key, like so name equals ferret and color equals purple. You can add some kind of this pair of data. And the syntax goes like that. There's a question mark, and then the first parameter, name, equal the first value. And if you add one more and one more, then you don't use question mark, you use the end character, and then another name equals value, and then end, another name equals value, and so on and so on. You can add as many as needed. So that's the syntax on the request. How to get those values on the backend? So let's say I have this localhost users, and I use this syntax, and older than equals 35, and newer than equals 123, and else equals something, right? So I just put them in such a format. And if I start the server, let me do that. So I start the server, and I had this endpoint here that would accept this query, right? The users, and then all they're done, right? So how to get access to that? You have in your rec, the request object, when you use params, you use rec.params, right? And then rec.params, for example, user ID for user ID and stuff like that. For the query parameters, for user ID, you needed to define that user ID will be explicitly in that place in here. For the query parameters, I don't need to define anything in the path, because they are not only with the fixed amount and names, they can be like passed a lot of them. So I just define the path, and then I get the object query, right? And let's see what I get if I call this endpoint with those three: older than, newer than, and else, right? I call the endpoint, and this is console.log of rec.query here. So that's what's inside this object. I get all of them. I get older than and the value, newer than and the value, else and the value. So I can access them exactly the same way using query, not params, rec.query.older than or newer than or else, or all of them, right? I can access multiple of them. So for example, I access this one, and then I do else equal rec.query.else, right? And so on and so on. So if I run it again and I request here, right, I can get access to all of them. If I change that, something different, right, I get the different values. So this is another way of passing the data into the request. When to use which one? I guess that's a good question, because both of them work kind of similarly, so allow you to pass the data in. And the answer is that technically, I think for 99.9% of the cases, they could have been used this or that, and it doesn't technically matter. But from the quality of code way, right? If you want to write a good quality code, so what is good quality code? Is the code that other developers will understand when they read, right? So we will try to make follow different conventions. So how like everybody kind of agrees on the way to write that. So if you follow that, then other people will understand what you write. And the convention for the APIs, it's called REST or RESTful API. That's I think also quite important to read about that, like in the preparation for like future lessons and for the project, and try to really follow that, because that's one of the important stuff that will be really asked for on the interviews, and that's one of the like key key knowledge that you can have about APIs. So in the RESTful API way, you will use this the params in paths usually to identify, just by some IDs, identify resources. So if you want to get a user with specific ID, you will use that. You will follow this with passing the IDs here. So I think kind of like 90% covering rule of the thumb is that if you have some resource that you are accessing and you have the ID, you will put that in the param to access that. But if you have some, let's say, kind of like additional request on how to like want to filter the data or process the data a little bit, then it could go to the query parameter. So for example, if I want to get users older than something, that's not ID of the user. That's kind of like additional data on how to process that fits into the query. And then it's also like readable because it's descriptive. If it's user ID, I will put it after users, like users and then ID, because that's how I would structure my kind of folder structure. If I have multiple users stored in the folders, I will put them in folder users, and then each of the files I would call, for example, with the ID. So that's the general rule of thumb. Also recommend, like again, say reading about the REST API, and different people like differently kind of follow it very strictly, or not that strict. I recommend to maybe focus on the HTTP methods as one of the things that is important in REST API. And another thing to write. There may be three like key stuff I think are important. One, the good use of HTTP methods. So use the one that makes sense for getting. For example, don't get data with delete, right? Makes no sense. Or don't change data with get, because then somebody can get confused and actually that can cause bugs, right? Another is calling of the path, right? So when you read about that, they will say, for example, that not RESTful path would be something like get customers right in the path, right? Something sounds like an action, like get something, right? Because the get is here, you don't want to include that in the path. You want to just include the resources. So you work with resources. So you get and then customers. That's one of the other important stuff. Again, there is a lot to say about that. Really recommend reading. And third is about how to use the parameters, and know that the path parameters are 95% of cases used for IDs of resource, that specific resource you want to access, and then you use it as the path parameter. And query parameters are as any additional info for filtering the data that you deal with, or like special way of processing can go here. Okay, so that's about the rest and about the parameters. Do you guys did the exercise with the? Did you like succeed to get some, at least like some params from the? Did everybody succeed? Okay. That's I guess that's a good start. So with the query, for those who haven't succeeded with the getting query, also maybe if you can focus on listening and doing, you can do that now. If no, then practice that at home. So let's move to the kind of another topic. Let's see. Okay, one more thing. So for example, when we define our I will maybe make another file. Just
Can you post this one?
Sorry?
Can you post this one on Slack?
Okay.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes. I will try. Okay. Yeah, send to your email.
Who's the other right now? We just we are two now.
Okay, so you both.
Same name, same.
Okay.
I can see that.
I'll pack the whole folder. Kind of. Okay, I will just send the index.js, so it will be without packet.js and stuff like that, but because that would be easier. I will later, also after the class, I will post the whole code properly as the repository on GitHub and stuff. So
I guess in Gmail the contact said to send the JS file.
really,
Okay.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
oh, really? Oh, that's nasty.
So maybe just copy paste it as it is and
Yeah.
then
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's annoying.
security issues we can
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Okay, what's the email?
Sure.
Yeah, just type. Yeah.
It's
easier. Okay, subject. Okay, sent. Okay, so since we'll move. Okay, so another question. Let me start it. So I'm starting a server. That's my source code of my Express server. I'm having app-get / users, and then I'm having another app-get / users. In one I have return test OK, and another test OK. So what will happen if I call this endpoint?
Take the first one.
Okay, so let's try.
Yeah, I tried to call.
Should take the first one and then because
The last one.
Test OK, so it takes the first one. Yeah. So the order of like which you define can matter. So now let's imagine another situation. Let's say I define a path like that, users / let's say newest, and I define another path that will be users / right? If I defined two endpoints like that, one is users / newest as fixed string, another is users / and user ID as the string here. And if I, for example, take this one in this order, right? So we know that the order can matter. So what will happen now if I call this endpoint with /users and /1234?
nothing. You need to start the server.
Oh, haha. Yeah, good point. Okay, so what will happen now?
It's gonna read the first.
Another test OK.
Yes, exactly, another test OK user ID. What will happen now if I do it like that?
Another test,
Okay, yes.
Newest, yes, exactly. Because the Express will try to match the path going from the top to the bottom, and from the first one defined to the last one. So it will see if that fits the pattern. So we have users / newest. Does it fit in this pattern? It does, right? Users / and it thinks newest is like another possible ID here. So it passes this as the ID here. So what will happen if we do it like that and restart the server? If I call it with the newest now, yes, definitely. But if I pass anything else here, like newest 111, then it will fall back to the next one because it doesn't fulfill that much. Exactly. So that can sometimes like save you some time if you remember that, like fixing some bugs that you don't know what's going on, right? That can work.
Maybe we can add another one to put it in the end, to put only start, and then if you pass the customer, if you pass anything is not related, you can approve the message. This is important.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very good point. Yes. Right. So you mean put an empty one without the path, or?
There should be star. Like a string and star. Just
Star. Yeah.
And then also the block you
What
write
is
something. Here you can write it's not related to the server, it's not related to the
If we pass anything normal, it works like it was. But if we pass some path that is not really defined. Okay, I didn't do. Okay.
should remove the user as well.
I should actually do. No. It worked, but I didn't do a response. Okay, so that's probably will also happen to you quite often, right? When you do, and then the request is kind of hanging forever, and you don't know what's going on. So, can anybody tell me what happens here? Why the request is never finishing?
Because there's no response.
Exactly. Express is waiting for my code to do response.send to send a response, but I never did that. I just do console.log and I never sent any response. And this way, it will never finish because it's waiting for me to actually write the response that never will come. So how to?
But if you remove the function, no.
No, if I do like that, if I do response.send, not this. And maybe instead of console.logging, I will just do the send response. And then I call this endpoint. Right? Then I get the kind of catch-all path here.
When do we use response.end?
Sorry?
When do we use response.end?
The response.end. Good question.
We don't use it in Express, we use it in HTTP server.
Okay.
If we
And the static is used to show the whole path.
Yeah, this one is to match like any path here. So it's going, if I pass some path, it's going from top to bottom trying to match it. So the first one doesn't match, right? My user, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't match this one as well. Then this one, everything matches this one because it's an asterisk, so that's why it fulfills here. So that's kind of like a one way of making maybe returning sort of like a message like, well, this endpoint doesn't exist. You can, yeah, you can make, you can also with the response, you can status, right? Or status code. Is it like that or I need to do?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, let's try this one. You can also see here the status, right? 404 not found because I returned 404, right? There's another thing that probably, I don't know if you guys know, if you Google for HTTP status codes, it's kind of set of some useful codes that can be written. A lot of them, you shouldn't like really worry about them. I think the one thing to remember and to take away is and keep in memory is that the one that starts with 200 something, 200 or 203, 6, whatever, that means the response is successful. When it's 300, that means it's successful, but it will redirect the browser to another page. And actually most important is that 400s and 500s, those are errors. So if you get response 400 something, that means they're error. Or 500 something, that means they're error. What's the difference? 400 means usually that the client, so the person calling the API or the application, did something wrong, passed some wrong data, or something is wrong with that client. It's the client's fault. If it's 500 something, that means it's the server fault. The server screw up. It's not the client fault here. So that's the general idea. Usually depends on like company, but very often you will just use maybe 200 for success. This is by default set when you do response.send. If you set manually, you'll maybe set 400, maybe 404 not found, maybe sometimes unauthorized or forbidden if you don't have access to call the API. That's happening quite often. All of that other stuff, I don't see it like almost at all, so it's nothing to worry about. Not really to like even try to remember. Just know that if it starts with 4 or with 5, that's an error. And I guess that's the good takeaway.
But we define the error in that way. We define our errors with that way, like the status code.
Yeah, that's a way to set the response, right? So then the client will know that's error. So if you are, that's actually one thing that I want to do today. So what happens? Do you know about throwing errors in JavaScript, or like when something goes wrong, you get this like whole like stack trace, like so error at this line and code and stuff like that, right? So let's try to get an example. So let's go to my user.newest and let's do something silly here. Let's call a function blah blah. Do I have such function defined? No. So let's see what will happen. I need to restart. So what will happen if I do that? If I call users newest.
There is a
Users.
Yeah. Okay, now, what will happen now?
It just fall on the form, get error.
We will get an error, that's definitely, but how it will look like, let's try.
Yeah.
We get some kind of not really helpful to us, but this is we get 500, right? What does it mean? Server screw up. It's not client fault, it's server's fault, and something happened, and you get the like kind of error details here that maybe are not very useful for like you know, some consumer that uses that. It's more like for the developer to fix that. But can we ourselves decide how do we what will be the error returned to the users? Maybe maybe want to return some error message, something like, you know, something went wrong, or maybe you want to change that, maybe you want to behave differently, maybe we don't want to return all of that stuff, right? It contains like some lines of code and stuff like that. We want to do that. We can do that, and that's like one thing that's quite often done. So we can write middleware. This is another thing that exists in like Express. Find no, dang.
Is most of the company they use Express in the work?
Express is one of the most popular frameworks. Yes, like nobody really uses the HTTP server, like the built-in pure one, because it's too pure. It's too like bare bones. It doesn't have like no functionality that's needed to like build stuff fast. So Express is the most popular. There are others. Like I usually use one called Koa, but it's kind of like more. It's a little bit newer and like not so mainstream still. But I think they are pretty interchangeable. You can do stuff with this one and the other one. You can do similar stuff with both of them. Oh yeah. So another thing is that there is a thing called middleware in Express that we can either find some like ready middleware provided by somebody else, or we can write our own small middleware. And what it allows us to do is like let me maybe. It allows us to kind of plug us in before or after the normal code executed here. So we can kind of execute some code before the request is passed to this method, or after. And we can, for example, try to catch the error that happens here and handle that in some way. So we can kind of, if I find a tool to visualize that. Mark, okay.
Just was one of the tasks for the people who just graduated final project. One of them, she was her job just catching errors. So if something happened, what she's like. So I was watching her how she's.
Okay, I don't know how to erase that. Okay, I'll just draw on the right side. So let's imagine that we have our. Okay, it's ugly. I'll use the mouse. Okay, so let's imagine we have our kind of code, right? So when we call the get for the mouse, oh yeah, thanks. Right, so we have get and we have some path, let's say users. Oh, it's so ugly. Please excuse me. Okay, it's written users here, right? And there's our code that will, for example, like call the database or get the data from the file and return to the users. And and let's say there is like there's a client, right? Let's say some browser or whatever. I will draw a laptop here, right? Right, and he is calling that. So with Express, right? You get this, and this guy is returning you the response. And what we can do with middleware, and what's actually happening when we call this and we get the error. So what's happening here? There is a built-in middleware in Express that will handle all the errors, right? So it will not allow the application to crash, right? When the error happens, it will handle that, and it will make this error page response based on that. So what's built in here is that on the way here on the response, there is a kind of code that when this thing throw error, it will catch the error and it will prepare this error response, set the error code to 500, and return that HTML looking error response to us, right? So what we want to do, we want to write one here, right? So that will handle the error and set the response ourselves. So this one don't need to do the job. We want to do exactly the same job. We want to kind of replace that one that is built in here and process the error in our own way. So we want to plug ourselves in after the request and after like every request. So that's perfect job for the middleware. So let's see what documentation says about the middleware. So middleware is functions that have access to request and response objects, and the next middleware in chain. So there are like multiple middlewares can be registered, and each of them can happen after the other one. And what are the use cases? Right? We can make error handling. You can make the router. In the homework, I believe that I've seen that you were using this app.use. This is a middleware, right? For routing. So in the homework, I've seen like here, right? You're using app.use for different paths. You are having your middleware that happens, and that's basically a use case of middleware for splitting the code into from one file to multiple files for different paths, and that's perfectly good use case. But the difference is that this one applies only to this specific like path, right? And we will now register a middleware to apply to everything. So we'll catch every response and see what's happening there. So we define that by app.use, and then we pass in a function that gets request, response, and next. Next is a function that we need to call inside middleware to execute the next middleware, and so on. So they keep going. And there are some examples how to do that. So let's try. Let's actually Google for some example code of X handling middleware. And let me see. So there's also like a special way of defining the middleware that will handle errors in Express. When we pass in a function that accepts 4 parameters instead of 3. So error, request, response, and next. That middleware will be called anytime the error happens in the endpoint, right? So it will be passed here, and then we can do ourselves. We can, for example, log the error. We can decide which status code we return. For example, 500. We can decide to send some like response that what will be sent as the response here. So let's do that. Okay, so let's try to define our middleware. Okay, let's define.
Is it necessary to put it like in order, or?
I think so. That's why I put it to the bottom, and I want to see it probably not working, and then I want to move it to the top. So I suspect so. I'm 90% sure. So let's see. So I will write the middleware, right? So I do app.use, and I pass in the function with some arguments, right? So they have to be 4 of them if it will be an error handling middleware. Error, whenever error happens, it will be passed here. We have the request, we have the response, and we have the next function to call for the next error handling middleware to do its job. And what do? We will console.error the error, so we see that something happened with there may be some message. Right? Maybe make it bigger. And here we have also access to the response, right? We can response something like, yeah, we can set the status, so that's like another way to send the status to, for example, let's make it 400 just for testing, or something different. Let's make it make it 543. I don't know what does it mean. We are just testing now. Don't need to make too much sense. And we are sending the response. Let's say error happened. I'm not calling next because I don't want the next error middleware to happen. I'm already handling the error. I don't need the next the default middleware to happen now. I handle that myself. I'm fine. I don't need that to happen, so I don't call the next. And let's see now. So now I call again my broken endpoint, and let's see if it works, right, with the function blah blah that doesn't exist. I get the response, error happened. I get my custom error code 543, and I have the console.error, error middleware caught an error, and then I get the error message here. So this way I can log that. There are libraries that allow you to you can find a library, that's also something to like research, that allow you to log all the, for example, messages you want to a file, right? So when the server is running and the error happens, you can later come and open the file and see like at which hour what error happened. So then you can later debug your application when somebody tell you, oh, like, you know, I tried half an hour ago and the API didn't work, like why? Then you can go, you can investigate that. So that's also a big part of like a developer job to actually go dig into the logs, right? The huge text files with a lot of info and try to find like what went wrong at this time. So logging is important. For now, we will just log it to the console. We could also like write ourselves very simple, right? Using the fs, right, file to open some file and start writing those logs in. Maybe if we have a time later, maybe we can do that. But for now, let's just log it to the console. So we just display the error here, and we return some status here. What kind of like information can we have here? We have from the request. Let me see in the documentation. I think we can get original URL. Let's do like that. Error happened in. We have access to the request object, and we can kind of use it for our logging and to like try to show more information what went wrong. So what I added from the request object, there is a property called original URL, and let's see if that works. Yeah, so basically that gives you this. So when I log in the logs, I will know like where the error happened, right? You can use the request params even here, and you can do everything you could do in the normal endpoint here.
How can you catch the log files usually? The log files.
How to start logging?
No, and how you catch them later. So for instance, if I'm gonna come in half an hour, someone says there is an error. And how can I see it? How can I find the data?
Yeah, so usually for that, almost like always, we use like special like libraries that somebody else write that will allow us to like store the logs in the files, for example. There are other ways. So in the much more complicated scenarios, you can even send the logs to the logging like kind of software can send the logs to another server when it can be like, you know, visible in some like web interface and stuff like that, right? But the basic and the most common and the like almost like exclusively used in the like, you know, when you write your own project, right? When you don't work in a company in a big setup with huge team, when you just make your own project, you usually always 99.99% will store it in just in the file. So you can later go to the file and just, you know, find when the error was logged there. So that's the most common. For logging libraries, actually I don't know for Node. Recently I'm working with C#. I don't remember the Node logging libraries, but let's see. You can probably find tutorials, and there are like Pino, super fast, all natural JSON logger, or all kind of different libraries that you can npm install and start using. If you like really want, you can write your own file writing, right? So you could do like the file system here and open file and write something and close file, all that kind of stuff. That's also possible.
Is it recommended to use the error handling @u right at the right below or right on top?
With the, I think here it actually it works when I put it here. So I think it's only the thing with the middleware is that I think it maybe matters between if I define multiple middleware, then which middleware I define first matters. So on the request, it matters between the order of this request to that request, and for middleware it matters this middleware to that middleware, but they don't necessarily matter between request and middleware. But I'm 90% sure about that. So at least it works if you put it at the bottom. If it doesn't work, it makes sense to maybe move it a little bit and then see if that helps. Okay, that's logging. So I think if you can now in your projects, right, you can just add the error logging. So you display some, you can return the error actually, right? So you can say that. So the task will be like that. We want the error to be as the JSON object here. So we want to make a new object like that, called like all error response. And we want to have like two parameters here. We want to have error that will be just, and we want to have the URL, which will be the request original URL. And what we want to send is the and just normal 500 error, right? So we want to make that, and let's see how it works. To see one thing. Yeah, okay, I don't need to stringify. So, and the error is, let's make it okay, so I want to get such an output, right? So we want to get the error kind of message and which path which URL we are accessing to when we got the error, and return that in like more kind of better JSON format. So let's do that in the projects you have already.
This would be executed if the one doesn't match any
You restarted the server.
Yeah.
So you will in this case you have which matches with this one.
Make the error. I think that might be because this is different. This is not that kind of like an error happening in the code. This is that
And here you
not
can
existing
usually
path.
like
So
use
kind of error, but it's different kind of error. So for that, we can handle that with the star, with the asterisk path right at the end. You can handle anything that doesn't exist, you can handle it.
like any
I just call a function that will be
doesn't match.
blah blah,
You don't have
just not something that
this function won't work.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's many kind of errors, and this error says that there's no route, there is no such route as
four parameters: error, request, response, and request. That's how
this message would be executed if you have an error in your server.
just the rest.
So an error in your server, not an error which clients use, like if you can decide like anything. And this means that your server has an error. How do you restart the server?
Only the right.
Can you go
Yeah, and also close the bracket because it's a segment. And yeah, I think that should be right. And also here the dot, not the column.
Yeah, he didn't
Yeah, I will double P and here's one more, so just copy from there.
So you don't see that
I think that looks okay. Modern as that. Does the error response is that correct? This error response is 1 P and this one has 2 P, so that's not that. Now it's 0 P. This one. Yeah, just here. I think that should work. You can try it. Needs to be started.
Where is your error? So you should put errors I missed it.
Can you come back to it?
Yeah.
So because
Yes.
just special.
He's writing the title file. No, you need to copy that.
I need to wait.
Yeah, because then you need to compile that.
there's an error inside the route.
Yeah, but really recommendation. It's a little bit more stuff setup, but it's much like Like you've seen that the function
Because if the error was outside the
here you don't say that.
so you
But
want
it showed you that there was an error effect, so you can avoid a lot of errors.
yeah, and the server wants those, so we don't get a response.
Okay. So when you guys have the error handling function, how to test that, right? So how I made an error in my code is that I just called a function that doesn't exist, right? I just call some blah blah, right? This is clearly not existing, so that will cause an error. So you can do something similar. You can, try to access some objects that don't exist, like AA, or anything that would cause an error, like QQQ, that's not defined, and if I do .QQQ, that will cause an error as well. So that are examples.
I have
'Cause
Like it's not like executing the state. It executes this one.
We can also yeah, that's okay.
اللي عندك
So error handling, where is it?
Okay.
Yes, if you put something here, like if you put something here or anywhere, then it's not showing the error.
Yeah, this is not really an error in JavaScript. That's the funny part. Just doing that, it's not enough for an error. So to make an error, you would need to, because this thing is by default undefined, and it's just undefined, so nothing happens. So if you want an error, you can try to call a function that is undefined, and then it will cause an error.
Works for me. Okay.
Yeah, or you need to do something like blah 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 dot something blah blah blah, and then you try to call blah 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 dot, and then it will cause an error.
This is how it's supposed to
This is compiler error, so
It still works. Here.
let's have a look. So let's go back to the code. Which part of the code is the postman? Let's see the postman. Did you restart server? I need to click on the text and then try.
Sorry,
I don't know. Why just you get the different response, another says, okay, that's not the
yeah.
it's not something.
So it is here.
Very awkward. Just maybe for now, just test, just comment it out, just test it works. Okay.
Also, that was.
The syntax. There is some unexpected character.
I understand that. Okay, so I have to.
Yeah, because it's another type of error. It cannot even
Yeah.
start the like the event cannot even start exactly.
Okay, so I just have to.
I need to find where. I
So
think
somewhere.
it says that something is here. So you might see.
Okay,
It might be
here.
real much of the figure this out.
If I have to do that. Okay, so I just. Yeah.
Do you know why I
So you can use app.use for kind of like split the code into smaller pieces and for example for smaller tabs you have a lot of elements, right? So you can kind of one thing is split this code and then kind of like use this routine on that side. I can like show later the homework. Another is for error handling. Another is for example, authentication. So let's say you make imagine you're working with a bank, right? And you create an endpoint that will transfer money, right? From one account to the other. You don't want me, right, that I don't have an account that's older and transfer money from your account to my account and or authenticate, right? So you want to keep like special secret calls or something like that. So very often you will have a middleware that before any endpoint is called, it will check if the secret token is the secret password or code is there. If wrong, then you just cancel the request and you will not output anything. That's what that means. So they are so like smaller things, whatever you actually find a use case, but those are the most common ways to do that.
بس ما كيف بالشرح يعني بالشرح هون
So the next it's like a middleware only for handling errors and security.
Oh, I have to.
The next guy has this one should work for every but that would call the next error. So what's happening?
Okay, makes sense.
If that works,
Here.
the next
What
year,
they are longing for.
I think if you write another middleware but without that, just can I? Work like that. And for example, you want to transfer the one just to make it different. And also from here. And it's right to start the server now. Oh, I got another one. Yeah, you're part of this one. Okay, let's see.
I didn't see that. This one, I just
Maybe for there, special. I can check this out.
Yeah. When you log it here, it means there is an error in the code, not in the server. You have this error is there, check the error in the
Welcome back.
common error API.
Mhm. So in the next, you need to pass the error inside the next call to your question. So, and that will pass the error for the next middleware. You can try that out and see if it works. Okay. We have a look. What was your name again? Richa. You asked me the question about the also middleware, how you can other way like to use it, right? So here in the homework of I don't want to like pronounce Fatima, right? She used it to split the code into smaller chunks. So every kind of like a path goes into its own file that she requires, and then Kado use middleware. Because middleware is a little bit like a get or like actually an endpoint on steroids. It have this next, but other than that, you can do the same stuff in that, right? So she use it here, and that just works as well. That's the one use case. And another use case, just to show it, it's not really something that you guys should like look very deep, just so you know that it exists. For example, it can be used, like common use case for middleware is for authentication. So I think a good example is that let's imagine you make a bank application, right? And you don't want, you will create an endpoint that will allow to transfer money from one account to the other. You don't want everybody to have access to that, right? Just don't want me to come there and transfer all the money from the bank to my own account. So usually, very often when you make a backend, you want to add authentication there. So you want to add some kind of maybe like secret token or secret code or something like that that you need to pass so the request can succeed. If you don't pass that or it's invalid, you want to reject the request and don't allow that. So that's very often use case for middleware. When you will have authentication middleware, usually they have there are libraries that are provided that handle all the like checking the tokens and like specific way of authenticating. You can npm install. There's one called Express Session for like storing the like secret in session. Don't want to go into details, but usually they're also handled as middleware. So that's another like use case. You can of course write your own. For example, we can maybe do that as the last example to kind of silly, but I think also maybe valuable way to try this out. So I want to write a new middleware that will allow only requests that have my secret code set to something I know to work. So for example, I have my endpoint user newest, right, and responding that. And I want all of that endpoint only happen if I provide a special query parameter called secret that has the value of maybe my name, Radek, right? So I want to do that as the middleware. So let me try this out. So I want to write a new middleware, use, and this is not error handling middleware. That's like the normal middleware. So I just provide function with only 3 parameters: request, response, and next. So that's the distinguishment between error handling and normal middleware. This one has only 3 parameters. So in here, I want to check if let's say request dot, okay, let's assign it to new variable. Secret equals request dot, how to accept the query parameter that I pass. That's a param parameter, and the query, exactly. Query dot secret, I pass it in, and if secret is not equal to some secret code, right? A little bit silly, but work. I want to do response dot status. I want to pass 401. I think it's unauthorized or forbidden. It basically gives the or 403, that's forbidden. gives the information that you don't have access, and send a response. Send some response, whatever, right? If the secret is not correct, and I will return my function. So what I'm doing here, or what I'm not doing here, I'm not calling next here. So I don't allow the other code, the like get function or the other functions to actually execute, because I don't call next. I just set the response and I finish execution. If the secret is correct, so I don't go in here, I will just call next. That will allow the next piece of code to execute, and finally, like, my code will execute because the secret is okay. Let's see if that works. So I call my, okay, I will fix my endpoint, maybe now it's broken. Okay, doesn't work. Let me have a look. Let me see if I move it to the top, if that makes any difference. Okay, so
You don't give the parameter.
yeah, I didn't give the query, so now I get no access, right? So if I try to access the endpoint, that should work normally. It should give me test okay, but I don't give the secret. I get 403 forbidden. That's what I set as the response, and I get the no access. Nice try, hacker, right? So I'm rejected. My code is not executed here. So also, like, I moved my middleware to the top. It is confusing, right? Because it depends kind of on the type. Error middleware can be defined on the bottom, and that doesn't matter. But the normal middleware and the gets and post and all the other requests, the order matters. So if I define it lower, then everything above could be still executed without that. It's a bit confusing. Sometimes if something doesn't work, you need to try to move stuff a little bit around and see if that makes a difference. The order matters in Express. So let's see if I pass my secret key here. And secret. Test okay. New user. If I pass some different secret that is not correct, no access, right? That's a good use case for a middleware. And any other endpoint, right? Because I could have, if I only want to like protect this endpoint, I could have copied the same code like kind of here, right? And if I don't have the query, then reject. But then if I have another endpoint, I would need to copy that again, and then again, and then again. Makes no sense. That's why we have middleware. It's a generic code that is used for a lot of endpoints in the same form. So you don't have to copy this over and over in different places. You have it in one place that affects all the endpoints. Or you can, for example, specify only part of them. For example, I think that could work, but let me try. So this one works only for starting paths with users. So if I have, okay, how is the touchpad? I will change that to, let's say, consumers newest or something. And restart. So for users, I need and if it's consumers, I get that, right? So this is like providing this here, it will match for the beginning of the path. So it will match any path that starts with this users and then anything after that. So with that, I'm protecting endpoint that starts with users. I'm not protecting this endpoint, but I'm protecting this endpoint here. And that can be used, for example, if you have some private API that need to be protected and some public API. For example, if you write your own application, let's say a full stack application, maybe like you can access everybody to get like maybe your details, like whatever, which university did you attend. But maybe you have another endpoint that will be able to change that and change the data that you have an admin panel, right? that you need to have the secret, and then you don't want everybody to change that. So then you have the authentication. That's a possibility. That is very naive way of authenticating, right? So hard-coded kind of string inside. It kind of works, but only in the simplest scenarios, and usually it gets more complicated than that, but that is a good beginning, good start to at least have something.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So for instance, instead of having this text, the string, no access, blah, 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 how could we load a website, like Google instead?
Again?
So instead this, how can I load like website, like Google or whatever, like bring website instead like that? Or
So you want to redirect?
Yeah. So can I write it directly, like without string www something? Because sometimes there is an API is like a nice design web page. You can just get the API, put it here. So if something wrong, you can see this error.
I'm not sure if I get the question.
You can, instead of sending a string, you can send a file that you've created.
Okay.
And
I mean, you could have sent, you could have sent like HTML code, right? I can make like if that's one. It's not really very often happening in like real life. Or you want to redirect, change.
Redirect, yeah.
Okay, that's also. I mean, this is an API. So usually, if you call it from Postman, it will not redirect, right? Because Postman is not browser. So it would only happen if it would only work if you open that in the browser. So, but you can do that. Let's see. So, you can. There is a response.redirect that you can. Yeah, you can call this, and that will redirect your browser to something else, right?
Where do you put the secret word? Does it prompt the user in any place to enter the secret word?
Sorry?
Is the user at any stage prompted to put the secret word?
No, I just take the secret from a query parameter. So I need to add the secret. It's quite small, so you don't see at the. Maybe try me. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I can see it. So here, I just made it so I need to add the secret here as the query. Usually, there are also like that kind of stuff can be done in the headers. So request has headers, and there's like even one more way of putting data in. But for now, for our cases, I think it's okay to just use the query. That also works also fine. So what I did here, I added the query parameter with secret, and I made a middleware that will execute on every request. Okay, now it's only on starting with users, but I want to protect everything. We'll execute at any request, get the secret from the query parameters, and see if it's set to the correct value. If it's not, I want to return 403. That means forbidden, no access, and I want to return this as the message that you don't have access here. And if I pass the authentication, provide the correct secret, I call the next, that is the thing in the middleware. So I allow the next piece of code to execute after middleware. You remember on the drawing I made, right? Let me see. So we were doing the error handling middleware here on the response. Now this middleware that I added here is no error handling. It's the kind of request middleware. So we are adding it here. And if a request comes here and I'm checking here for the secret, if I don't call next, this is the next piece in to be executed, the request block. If I don't do that, I just kind of shortcut that and return the response directly here. But if I call next, I allow this to be executed and do its job. So that's how it works. Okay, so just as the exercise, I think you guys can just implement that one. This one, just to say, matters where it is located, so it makes sense to add it at the beginning of the file, so it can include all of the endpoints. And you can put your own secret password, and you can see if it works. I need some water.
Can you change the mouse on the
All right. Okay.
Or should I write?
Yeah, I mean, it's also good like it's like to write directly, so kind of like remember the syntax, right? How and here you have the space of the beginning. Yeah, I think it's good exercise to practice. I mean, you can do that, of course, right? But if you do it here, you kind of practice the syntax of the query, right?
Oh, so square is square.
This one is correct.
So I need to.
Yeah, you need to pass it here and equals, and then you pass the value, and then you check on the server if that's what you actually.
Yeah.
Is it that? Yeah, that should work. It should be set. I was no. You have the error function.
Yes, that is the
Yeah.
Because first.
yeah, all the people. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's going in and then you have the error, so that's kind of working.
Yeah, but
you have the
But the secret is not to add the first one.
Blah, blah is not fine. Yeah, I have blah, blah.
Trying to work and find.
So now you can pick something different. Yeah.
Before we were talking name up, how to set up the base for each work. For instance, one week after I need to see an error. So we're trying to do it in that way. App consumption and what the new one. It's really interesting to see here they want
That looks good. That looks But I think that's get UTC days. You can check with the documentation for that. Can I see? Can you cover? it returns the day of the month. Today is the 8th month, but you need to, if you just the next new date without getting to see, you can try it. Then it will probably bring the whole thing. You can try it without. No, just without the whole method. So just new date, and that's it.
Okay.
And try that. You set the environment variables.
Maybe you should.
I think it's that here we just have code and we can call. So here it's like there is a thinking operating system called variable. You can set some variable to something, and in the program you can get that system which you have set. And there's a way you can do that just like by that variable, how to get it. That's exactly what doing this. Yes. You set the Windows level, and then in the program, in the node, you have the access to the environment variables. You get that and then you compare what is talking the request with what you got from the environment variables. So you can easily change that without changing service.
So it doesn't.
Yeah, it should be It's kind of it will not be, if you restart the server, it will probably not survive, and that's the problem. Otherwise, you need to write this file.
Yeah, that's what I'm planning for. Basically, to start the server now, and you need all of them. If you have the name, you can save them.
I think, but you can find in the Google just Node.js how to store data file, right? I think it's called the FS. You need to require FS, and then you can open file on your PC and store data. So instead of console.log, you can also write up the file, and when you call another entry, you can open the file and read from the file and return it. It's not that complicated.
But it's good. It's good.
Yeah, it's a good exercise.
Yeah.
And I think that's useful.
I guess
That is something. Okay, everybody succeeded with the last task. Then I guess we can go home.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. It was really cool.
Learned a lot.
Yeah.
I hope so, and I'm glad.
Hope to see you next week too.
No, I cannot. Actually, I'm just a replacement.
That's
So
just a bad excuse.
Where do you work?
at Trustpilot. It's quite popular Danish, but now working quite worldwide. I'm working in, I mean, if you know Trustpilot, okay, just pack yourself, that's not important, right? So it's like a rating company when you can you can go and rate some service when you buy something in online shop, right? And you can rate them you write review, right? Oh, this product was this service was terrible, right? Only 1 star or 5 star, stuff like that. And I work in the team that's supposed to keep the review kind of fair and not cheating. So companies don't write good reviews for their own, kind of like kind of a internal police. I like to think this way, right? But we are called like trust and transparency team. So
That's nice.
There's also quite some developing.
If I ate a restaurant, I would like
Right on Trustpilot. It's a good platform. And you can also, if you find a restaurant you are not sure, you can try to find them and see what are the reviews of other people. Yeah.
But you
really.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Yeah. I'll stop the recording.